I'm Cristina Volpin from the OECD Competition Division, and I'm here with Marco Botta, who is a Senior Research Fellow at the Max Planck Institute for Innovation and Competition in Munich. Thank you very much for being here, Marco.
Thank you for inviting me.
Marco just contributed to the discussion at the roundtable here at the OECD on quality consideration in the digital zero-price markets. And we heard from the discussion that while zero-price products are not new to consumers, if we think about newspapers, radio, and television, today the world's largest companies do apply this business model in digital markets, and therefore it may be necessary for competition authorities to adopt the right to deal with the new challenges. So one of the first questions that spring to mind, Marco, is are there any legal barriers to applying competition law to these markets?
Thank you, Cristina, for the interesting question. I think the question is very important because it talks about the scope of application of competition law in zero-price markets. We know that, generally speaking, competition law is applicable to economic activities. And we have an economic activities when we have a sale of a product or a service for monetary, but also for non-monetary payment. So, of course, when we download an app, for instance, and we transfer our personal data, we somehow pay that service that we receive, and therefore I would consider that an economic activity which falls within the scope of competition law. While we have certain cases, like software developed by a limited community, or for instance, free encyclopedia online, which are developed for altruistic purposes, those clearly don't fall within the scope of competition law, since there is no clear payment in terms of non-monetary payments.
That's right. And another thing that you mentioned in your presentation this morning was that competition authorities may have to adapt their analytical tools to zero-price markets. Can you describe for us a few of these possible adaptations?
Yeah, think about the snip test, which is generally used to define the relevant market. What is a small price increase in a zero-price market? We know from behavioral economics that when the price is zero, if the price becomes positive, even if the price increase is very little, consumers automatically will switch to other products. So this leads to a very broad definition of the relevant market. We should look then for alternative tools that look, for instance, at the cost faced by consumers, at the decrease of product quality, in order to define the relevant market. Another important aspect which should be updated, let's say, is the definition of the market power. Yeah. So the classical definition that a firm has market power when it can raise price above the competitive level clearly does not fit the reality of zero-price markets. And also market share don't tell us much about market power in zero-price markets. So other aspects like the degree of attention of the users, direct and indirect network externalities, multi-homing, the degree of innovations are all factors which should be taken in consideration in assessing market power in zero-price markets.
That's very interesting. And another thing that you mentioned in your presentation, you expressed the view that competition authorities beyond analytical tools may have to rethink a little bit their approach to anti-competitive conduct, in particular in relation to remedies. How should they do so?
Yeah, this indeed, in my opinion, it's very important. The traditional approach that competition enforcers follow to impose a fine, to adopt an infringement decision, in my view, does not fit the reality of zero-price markets and more generally the digital markets, where we have a lot of legal uncertainty for the enforcers and also for the companies. In my view, the best remedy, competition law remedy, would be a behavioral remedy, which is negotiated with the parties, which is flexible enough, which can be reviewed on the basis of the development of the market situation. And during the session today, we discussed some of them, like increasing the degree of transparency of the consumer terms, so empowering the consumers to understand better what are the conditions, how the free service is actually received, what they have to give in return. Other type of remedies are other, let's say, conditions which are closer to data protection law, limiting the amount of time, the storage of the personal data of the users, and so on. Obviously, this opens another question, the interrelationship between competition law, data protection, and consumer law that we discussed a lot today during the session. And I'm in favor for a cooperation between different authorities, exchanging views and information during the investigations, but also to design together behavioral remedies which should be suitable to solve the market failure at stake.
Yeah. That's very interesting. Thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.